Now, it does always, as with the announcement of what's happened some weeks ago when I was preaching, the thought always comes to me, should I just sort of step down and not preach and so on? But again, just to remind you, I'm thinking these things, we are surrounded by death, yes? It's possible in our Central Coast context to kind of hide that. We would walk into the ICU, the neonatal ICU, NICU, in the hospital, and along the walls are stars, hundreds of stars, and they're the stars of babies who have all died. And it's an incredible reminder that in the midst of life we're in death. That man, woman is born to sorrow as sparks fly upwards, says the Proverbs. Our world is under this terrible judgment that brings death to us all. We will all die. And I'm sorry to bring this. You will die one day. We will all die. And that's bad, but what's worse is the Bible makes very clear in Hebrews chapter 9 that after death is judgment. Man is destined to die once and after that to face judgment. We will all one day stand before the judgment seat of Christ to give an account. How will that go for you? And this, as I say, is part of the reason I wanted to bring this word to you even today, is because this is the thing that stirred me to change my whole direction in life and give up everything to pursue the cause of actually proclaiming as much as I could the truth of the news of Jesus. Because we will all one day die. We'll all one day stand before the judgment seat of God, and we'll all have to give an account. And there's only one hope. There is a hope, but there's only one hope for our life at that point. And to declare that truth even today is profoundly important for us. That every one of us sitting here today understands how it's possible to stand before God on that day. Do you have this confidence? Is your confidence in the right place? And my great concern for us is to bring a word that helps us actually appreciate where your confidence should be. And that's been the whole burden of this book, the book of Romans, this letter. The whole Bible is the point of the whole book. It comes to this place now in chapter 4, which is what we're looking at this morning, chapter 4, and it brings us to the most wonderful and astonishing and amazing news that is almost impossible to believe, that people like you and I can be accepted before the holy God of the universe and welcomed home. Welcomed home. On what basis? On what basis? That's the thing we want to consider together today. Much of what we've been doing over these weeks as we've been going through Romans is bad news. Week after week it's been bad news until you come to chapter 3 verse 21, which we looked at last week with Jez. But now, there's this whole turn in the letter where the apostle, having laid the foundations of the bad news, now turns, but now there's hope. There's a place to find hope for the future for people like you and me, despite the truth about who we are. And well, this next section into chapter 4 drives home the wonderful news that there is hope by taking us into the heart of that hope, the foundation for that hope, which is in the very character of God. In the very character of God. And that's the message this morning. What I want to draw your attention to is who God is. What God is actually like, the true God. Not the God of fiction, but the God who created all things. What is he like? And the aim for you this morning that I have is that this might be deeply embedded in your heart and your mind and your soul, that you might understand this morning what God is actually like, who he really is. That might be a great help for us as we go out. This insight emerges from one particular verse, and I'm kind of giving this big lead up because the verse I want to draw your attention to, we're really only going to focus on one verse this morning. This verse that we draw attention, I want when I mention it for you to all grab your Bibles and go, look at it. Because this verse is the big verse. It's been the big verse in my life. It's the verse that was instrumental in a massive reformation of the church many hundreds of years ago. This is a profoundly important insight and truth at the very heart of the Christian message. And my job is to make it so that you understand it clearly. It is an amazing verse. You ready to look at what that verse is? It's chapter 4. Grab your Bible, look at it. Chapter 4, verse 5. I want you to memorize it today. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. There it is. Is that not the most astonishing verse you've ever read? Well, maybe. My fear is that many of us, you might not be familiar with this, and you might be hearing those words and find yourself going, well, I don't know, it looks all right. I don't know about that great. My hope is to make you see how extraordinary it is, how great it is. Now, how are we going to do that? I want to explain the words that he uses here. Verse 5 has got technical words in it that need some thought, but then put it together in its context and apply it to us. Let me explain some of the words. I've got a slide up here that helps us. He uses a series of words there. Look at verse 5 again. However, to the one who does not work. So the word work, he's not saying to the one who doesn't have a job. Right? The idea of work there is a technical word that's shorthand for a longer phrase, works of the law. And what he means by work is things that we might do to earn God's favour. That's why works of the law is a longer expression of the same idea, that we might do what the law says to make God favourable to us. That's what it is he means by works of the law. Works done, efforts, work that we might do to get God to be favourable to us. Works of the law, or works, shorthand. There's the first little technical word. To the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies. Now, that's the next technical word. We looked at this last week, but I want to get it in your heads again. The language of justification comes out of the law courts. So imagine a law court scene where there's a judge. The person accused of a crime is brought before the judge. At the end of the court case, when all is heard, he declares one of two things: condemned or justified. Acquitted, declared to be right with the judge, said to have no case to answer for. That's what the language of justification means, justified. It's not a declaration of what actually is the case for the person. It's what the judge says will be the case for the person. That separation is really important. It's not the judge saying what is, it's the judge saying what will be. Let me give you an example of this. Come back to Proverbs chapter 17. Really important to get this into our heads. Proverbs 17, keep your finger there in Romans 4. Proverbs chapter 17 talks about the language of justification by using the word acquittal. Verse 15, acquitting, justifying the guilty and condemning the innocent, the Lord detests them both. Now just slow down and think about this verse. What's being said here is in the context of a court case. If you have a judge that has someone come before them who's guilty, who's done the crime, and the judge declares justified, then God hates that because it's unjust. What the judge should do is declare guilty, should declare condemned if a person is guilty. You see, that's what justice is. And if someone's innocent who comes before the court, they should declare them to be justified. They're the ones who should be declared justified. Notice the language of justification is not a statement about what is in their life. It's a declaration of a judge about how the judge sees things. Do you see what's being said here? So that the judge can get it wrong. I guess that's partly what's being said. They might actually be guilty but declared to be justified. Well, that's the language of justification. It is to say you are right with the judge, no case to answer for, just as if you'd never done anything wrong. Justified. The next one, come back to Romans chapter 4. However, to the one who does not work, does not do things but trust God who justifies, declares to be right, the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. Now, the word credited comes out of the financial world. This is a particular context, and you see it particularly used there in verse 5 and 6, 4, 5 and 6. It's the language that comes out of the financial world where money is credited to you. Something is counted as if it's yours, even though it's not actually yours. It's counted as if it is. This thing that's credited to you is external to you, and it's credited to your account, counted to be yours. And that kind of idea is made clear by the way he then talks in verse 4 about money. The one who doesn't work, wages, money is credited to them. You see an external thing credited. This is all important for us. Let us try and put it all together now. What is actually being said here. The one who does not work, to to the one who doesn't try to earn God's favour, but instead of keeping the law to impress God, instead of working to prove to God that you're worthy, instead of doing all of that working, to the person who doesn't work but trusts God, depends on him, and what he does depends on him, the God who, mind-blowing, the God who justifies the ungodly, who acquits the guilty, who declares right with themselves the one who aren't worthy of that declaration. For those who trust the God who is like that, their faith, their trust leads to righteousness, a right standing being credited to them. Now, I think that's what the verse is saying. And sit with this. See what has just been said. To the person who relies on God being a certain kind of God, the kind of God who justifies the wicked, who declares right the guilty, to the person who trusts that that's what God is like, that person will be accounted right. That is outrageous. What kind of God is God? Now, it's not as if there's many gods, there's only one God, but what kind of God is the real God? Well, what the Bible says is the kind of God is the kind who justifies, declares right with himself those who ought to be condemned. That's the kind of God God is. Now, remember Proverbs 17. God hates the judge who declares right with himself the guilty and condemns the innocent. But he says, Paul says in Romans chapter 4, verse 5, that that's exactly who God is. He's the God who declares right, justifies, acquits the guilty, the ungodly. Now that begs a question, of course, how can God be like this? How can God be just and the one who justifies the ungodly? How can that be true? We'll come to that in a second. But just appreciate that for a certain kind of person sitting here this morning, putting aside all the questions about God's justice and so on, if this is true, there's a certain kind of person sitting here today who is thrilling to the truth of it. There's a certain kind of person who's hearing this going, that is the most astonishing, amazing news I've ever heard. Now, which kind of person is it? What kind of people thrill to the truth of this statement? The people who are guilty, the ungodly, the unworthy. They're the ones who are blown away by this conviction, this claim, because they're hearing that if you stop trying to impress God, stop pretending you ever could impress God, and you bow your head before this holy God and put your lives in his hands, your future's secure because he's the God who justifies the ungodly. Wow. Now, this statement isn't a slip of the pen. It's not mistaken thoughts. Paul has carefully crafted all that he's writing through this book. He's carefully considered. In fact, it's the very reason Paul is doing his ministry that he's doing, the very reason I'm doing what I'm doing. It's because this truth was brought home to him and it changed his whole life, changed my life. That God is the God who justifies the ungodly. It changed his life once he realised he was ungodly. You see, this is the key. There's a certain kind of person sitting here today who's hearing this news, and it is the most incredible news. It's the ungodly. But there's another kind of person sitting here this morning and living outside of these walls actually too, for whom this news is devastating, horrifying, terrifying. What kind of person would find this kind of news terrifying, devastating? The person who continues to imagine that you can impress God, that you can live a life that's worthy, that you can please him by your works, And you built your life around being a person who has done enough to be okay. And that kind of person is the vast majority of humanity. And most concerningly, it might be some people sitting here today. May it not be so. This is the whole point of the book of Romans, or one of the whole points of the book of Romans in these first bunch of chapters of Romans. Have you felt the weight? You've been coming along, if you've been coming along week after week, sitting through Romans with us, you will have felt, I dare say, this sense of oppression and weight and darkness as we've looked at sin and God's judgment and punishment, and it keeps going chapter after chapter, and you might find yourself, what's going on? I keep coming back to church thinking it's going to lift me up and inspire me, and this church just talks about sin again, and down I go. And you might find it all depressing. Why? Why does Paul spend so much time on that topic? Because until a person understands that they're unsaved, they'll never find true saving. Until a person realises there's no hope, they won't ever find the basis for true hope. Let's back up and do a bit more context, the larger context. These chapters on sin, chapters 1, 2 and 3, all come to a great climax there. Chapter 3, get your Bibles, make sure you look at it, verse 10. It comes to a great climax, or a preliminary climax. There is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands, no one who seeks God. All have turned away, they have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. That's where Paul has been driving. The whole point in these chapters is to come to the point of religious people and irreligious people. People with the Bible, people without the Bible, coming to the place of realising no one righteous. Not even one. Now, all of that is not just that he might be down on you, but that he might get you to the point of realising chapter 3, verse 20. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by works of the law, by things we do. No one will be declared righteous before God by things we do. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of sin. This is Paul's great climax. This is the massively important point. No one righteous, not even one. There's no one who has ever done enough. No one who can do enough. All have fallen short of the glory of God. And the point is, you have no hope on the basis of the way you've lived your life. There's no hope by the path of personal goodness, merit or worth. And this is a shocking thing to come to terms with. That's why Paul's taken so many chapters to drive it home, to teach it to us. It's so hard to believe. And we keep reverting back even when we do believe it. We keep reverting back, imagining surely it's based on how we've lived our lives that we'll be okay. In April this year, Pope Francis died. Do you remember? It was a massive event for the community. The world stopped and grieved. It was a very, very significant time. What I found most significant, though, was the responses to his death in terms of reflecting on where he is now. One of the things that quickly happened after his death was that people began to ask the question, do you think the Pope's in heaven? Do you remember that? Do you think the Pope's in heaven? And that question was being asked in all kinds of contexts. It was being asked at morning tea time. It was being asked on media, social media, and so on. There were three kinds of reactions to that question when it was asked. One reaction was, it's too early to have that kind of discussion. Let's just grieve. It's too early. Second reaction was, how can you judge a person's heart? It's beyond us. Will he be in heaven? We don't know. But the third reaction was most significant. The third reaction largely came from Protestant Christians, churchgoers, who said loudly and with some kind of energy and emotion that it's offensive to even ask the question. How dare you even question whether the Pope is in heaven? The answer? He, of course, is in heaven. Now, odd if you know Roman Catholic theology that Roman Catholicism doesn't allow you to say with any certainty that a person's in heaven because of Catholic theology. So it's interesting that Protestants would be so loud in insisting he is against the Catholic theology itself. But what was more interesting still was the reasons people gave for why they're sure that he's in heaven. Let me give them to you. How dare you even ask? Of course he's in heaven, because he was a good man who gave up his life to serve, who turned away from wealth, who sacrificed so much, who led so many people towards God. He, of course, will be in heaven because of his works. Now, is that not extraordinary? And as much as it came from people who were in churches, who were even in church leadership, it demonstrated tragically that those people do not appreciate the actual point of Christianity. To the extent that you imagine that the Pope is in heaven because he did so much good, is to the extent that you have completely misunderstood what the message of the Christian faith is. That there is no one righteous, not even one. That no one will be declared right in his sight on the basis of works, on the basis of the works of the law, because the works of the law do not save, they only make us conscious of sin. And so insomuch as the Pope was relying on his goodness, his works, his righteousness, he is completely lost, says Paul. Now, I'm not passing judgment on where the Pope is. I'm simply giving you the principle that the Bible is making this emphatic claim that no one will be justified, declared right in God's sight by works of the law, because there is no one who has done the works required to be justified on the basis of their works. His life was not good enough. Neither is my life, and neither is your life. The law was not given to be a ladder to climb our way to God. It was given to be a light to reveal how far we are from God, that we might see ourselves shattering to the self-righteous person. And the self-righteous person is the default position of every human. Humble though we may appear, we repeatedly make the mistake of thinking we are basically good, and so deep down, when we stand before God, people keep imagining God will certainly let us in because I haven't killed anyone, because I didn't commit adultery, or at least not actually, because I've tried to be a great parent. I've done the best I can. Surely I'll be okay, is the default position of everyone. And the Bible keeps saying emphatically, there's no one righteous, not even one. Before God, no one will be declared right before him by works of the law. What hope then? Well, the only hope is that God is a certain kind of God. He's the kind of God who justifies the ungodly. He's the kind of God who declares right with himself and acquits the wicked, the unworthy. That's our only hope, that God is that kind of God. So come back to this whole passage and put it into its immediate context. Chapter 4, verse 1. What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? Which matter? The matter of whether we are justified through faith that he's talked about there in chapter 3, verse 22. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. What did Abraham discover in that matter? Well, if Abraham was justified by works, by his own impressive life, by his own basic goodness, if Abraham was justified before God on the basis of how he'd lived, then he had something to boast about. Not before God, but something to boast about. But to prove that that was not the case, to prove that Abraham was not justified by the way he lived, declared right by God on the basis of his works, he quotes in verse 3, Genesis 15, verse 6. And Genesis 15, verse 6 says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Friends, just to pick up a couple of things here, it is the nature of works religion, which is every religion except biblical Christianity. It's the nature of works religion to be boastful in a humble way. Because if my religious performance gets me to God, then I must necessarily think of myself in a very positive way. And I'll necessarily become comparative, relative. I've got to find people worse than me to make myself feel better about how I am, because I'm not perfect, but at least I'm better than them. So works religion always creates a boasting culture, deep down, though we appear humble. Abraham was not this because he believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now, the other thing to notice here is Paul is not quoting the verse to prove that this thing called faith is a kind of personal virtue that God now decides to count as if it's righteousness. This verse is not saying, says Paul, that Abraham couldn't keep the law, but at least he could be a person of faith, and that personal virtue, God now says, well, let's count that as righteousness. Paul's saying that's not what I'm talking about. Now, how do you know that's the case? Well, you know that's the case because of verse 4, where what is counted to a person, what is credited to them, is external to them. The righteousness that's counted to them, the money that's counted to them is outside of them. It's counted to be theirs. It's not that God sees something in them and counts that to be. He gives them something external to themselves. It's called alien to them, an alien righteousness. It's akin, verse 7, to forgiveness. All of this drives home that faith itself is not a virtue that God rewards. That's not what's being said here. Paul is working hard to make it clear that that is not what's being said here. And you can see there in verse 11 that a righteousness might be credited to them. Do you see? A righteousness external to them might be credited to them. He's working hard to say this. And he's working hard to give the very clear impression that faith, far from being a personal virtue that's rewarded, faith is itself empty. Empty. Let me explain what I mean here. Picture this. You come before God on that last day. The spotlights are turned on. And you see, perhaps for the first time, the holiness of God, his immense splendour and magnitude, his magnificence, his otherness, the glory of God in all his purity. And you see perhaps for the first time your own sin. The heart is stripped back and you see who you really are. And in that context, you realise there's no bargaining with God. There's no fighting. You can't argue against his verdict. He is God. You are a creature, a sinful creature. What must a human do in that context? What a human must do is bow in total helplessness. I've got nothing. Whatever you do my life depends on what you do. Everything depends on how you respond, God. And your decisions and choices are entirely sovereign. And so, I throw myself on your mercy. I put myself in your hands, and my eternity hangs in what you do. That's where you come to. Now that's what faith is. That's what faith is. Faith is that place where you come to in life where you realise the glory and greatness of God, and my sin is such that my only hope is to throw myself on him. Do you see? Faith is nothing. It's thin. It's empty. It's that place you come to when I've got nothing and I throw myself on him and his mercy and await his verdict, which will be right. That's what faith is. You are putting your faith in him, and you've come to that place of total emptiness. Abraham came to that place. God had made a promise about his descendants, and Abraham and Sarah realised that they had nothing in them that could bring this about. The only hope it could ever come to was in God and his sovereign power. And so they bowed before God and said, it's you, it's all of you I trust in. That's what God says. Delivers, brings forth his declaration of righteousness. It's not that faith is righteous. It's that God, on account of Abraham coming with nothing, counts to him a righteousness that is not his own. God's own righteousness counted to him. You see, this language of it was Abraham believed God, it was credited to him as righteousness, is shorthand for by throwing himself on God's mercy and character as the God who justifies the ungodly, God credits to him a righteousness that's not his own on account of him coming to that place of emptiness. It's shorthand for that. This is critical, friends. Faith is not a virtue. It's not another kind of work, but it's a means by which a human puts themselves in the hands of God, and that saves, because the God we put ourselves in the hands of is the kind of God that he is, the God who justifies the ungodly. Don't leave this thought. Let's sit in it a little bit longer. Critical to your life with God is that you look to him and that you do that with nothing of your own to bring. That you give up thinking you've got any merit. That you appreciate the only person who has a hope with this God, who was saved before this God, is the one who was so humbled before God by their sin and his holiness that they realise there's nothing in you, in them, that could ever give rise to his acceptance of you. Until you come to that place, you've not understood Christianity. Your only hope is outside of you in the character of God, to be the kind of God who justifies the wicked, who acquits the guilty. Now, how is that possible? How can God be just and the one who justifies sinners? Well, because of the cross. That's why last week was so important, chapter 3. The whole thing hangs on that event of the cross, where the just punishment that you deserve, I deserve, wasn't just brushed aside. That would be unjust. It was laid upon Jesus as our substitute. That's why we talk about the substitution of Jesus. It's profoundly critical to the whole of the Christian message. That Jesus stands in our place and takes my sin upon himself, and God justly deals with my sin. He doesn't just blow it away. He justly deals with my sin in a substitute, his own precious Son. And by virtue of his death, I can now be acquitted, though guilty, without God being unjust, because he has condemned sin in sinful humans. Friends, this stuff is profound, it's deep. It's not intellectually complex. You don't need a high IQ to understand it. But it's very hard for people to get hold of it because of it's a heart problem, because of what goes on in us. And churches, forgive me for saying this, but churches across the world, down through history, who call themselves Christian churches, have not understood the Christian message, have completely misunderstood what Christianity is, and have continued to teach that if you're just good enough, if you come to church enough, if you give enough money, if you pray a certain way, if you seek to be the best, they keep teaching us if you do all of these things, God will look at your life and you will hopefully be okay. And that's exactly what the Bible is saying won't work. Because there's no one righteous, not even one. The law was given that we might be shown that no one will be declared right by works of the law. And we keep thinking, surely he's the God who justifies the ones who are actually good. Nature says this, the proverb says it, so we refuse to accept that we're unworthy. We believe we must in somehow be worthy, and so we keep pretending we are. But Paul says, no, you've got no hope. And in fact, the scriptures tell us that even our righteous deeds are filthy rags. And it's not saying this to be negative, but to drive us to see that your only hope is not in yourself, but in the character of God outside of you. Your only hope is in him. And so throw yourself on his mercy, that he might be just and the one who justifies the ungodly. That's your only hope, in the character of God. Now, what does all of this mean? I've got 3 or 4 quick points to draw our attention to finish. What does all of this mean? True Christians, true Christian churches are in essence humble. Truly converted people who understand the Christian message properly are humbled and broken because we've got nothing in ourselves to bring to this God. We have actually been brought by the Spirit and grace of God to face the facts about ourselves that we are ungodly. Church, if it's to be a Christian church, is the fellowship of the unworthy. Now, is that not beautiful? If you've come here today and you feel like, I'm not sure I'm good enough to come into church, I'm not sure I'm worthy to hang around with these very pious people, let me just tell you, I'm unworthy. We're all unworthy. You're in the right place to hang out with people like you. None of us have any righteous standing, and we're very conscious of our own sin and humbled by it. This is the place for the unworthy, and it's to be a church of humility. Humbled. Secondly, what it means is you don't have to focus on how much faith you have, as if it's a work. It's the person who does not work, who doesn't try and earn God's favour, who is declared right. It's the person who sees that even their faith is empty and a nothing. God is pleased with it because it brings us to him. So faith is pleasing, but it's not a work that merits. The kind of faith that connects you to this God, the God who justifies the unworthy, is the kind that means you fall on your face before him and say, you're the one who rules, you're the sovereign Lord, my life is in your hands, and my only hope is in you. And thank you that you are the God who justifies the unworthy, because that's who I am. How much faith do you need for that to happen? It's the wrong question. What matters is not how much faith, but what you do with the small amount of faith you have. Who you put it in. Yourself or God. Do not fall into the trap of having faith in faith and how much you have. Your faith is to be in God. Faith as small as a mustard seed. So you don't have to worry about how much faith you have. 3, it means you can be right with God at the same time you're a sinner. It means you can be right with God at the same time as you're a sinner. This is profound. The God who is the true God is the God who justifies the wicked while they're wicked. He doesn't justify the wicked after they've cleaned their life up. He justifies them at the time that they are wicked, which means you can be right with God and a sinner at the same time, because God's the God who justifies the wicked. Now, this is important because as you go on as a Christian, as you go on in relationship with this God, you will see more and more your sin. And the more you see your sin, the more you might fear that God no longer will have you. No. The more you see your sin, the more it ought to drive you to put your faith in him, not yourself. And so the more I see my sin, the more hope I have. Because the very thing that qualifies me before God to be justified is the fact that I come with my sin, with nothing. Now, I'm not suggesting you go on living in your sin. That's the next few chapters. having this experience with God by putting your faith in him who justifies the unworthy, the wicked, the ungodly, coming to him with emptiness and humility will change your whole life so that you won't want to live in sin any longer. But you are justified at the same time you're a sinner. Fourth, what matters more than anything is the way you think about God. That you see your only hope is in him, not in anything in you, but in him. That's faith. That's empty faith. That's true faith. The thing that looks away and looks to him. Have you done that? Have you looked to him? Are you doing that? Are you in a place now where you've been humbled to realise that your only hope is in the God who justifies the ungodly? See, humbled. It means you don't have to focus on how much faith you have, because that's not a work. It means you can be right with God at the same time you're a sinner. And what matters more than anything is the way you think about God. Are you in relationship with him by faith? Are you trusting in him? If you are, then you can know that you're justified. You're declared right. You're acquitted. You're in relationship with the God of the universe because he's the God who loves to justify the unworthy by the merits of his own Son. Let me pray. Well, our gracious God, we are humbled again by the beauty and wonder and greatness of your grace, that you are the God who acquits, justifies the ungodly. We thank you for that truth. Thank you for the revelation of it through the Apostle Paul, through the New Testament, through the Bible, through the whole. We thank you that it was revealed to us in the law and the prophets and all the way into the New. We thank you for this teaching that you've given us. And pray, please, that you would help us have it seared deeply in our hearts, that our hope, our real and true hope, is our trust in you, the God who justifies the ungodly. Amen.